Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On this week's docket, UFC and USADA, their 8-year relationship will soon come to an end. UFC 294 has a shakeup at the top of their bill. Let's discuss. Logan Paul and Dylan Dennis had a boxing match or something like that. All this and much, much more. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Gorgeous George. And with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week goes from MMA Junkie Radio, also the creator of SBC. He's in Las Vegas. Nolan King, up for Journalist of the Year. Give him a shout out. He's at the World MMA Awards.com. He's one of the best in the business. And of course, WEC and UFC longtime featherweight, also a member of the UFC Hall of Fame, Cub Swanson. Cold Coffee's on the ones and twos this week. And here we go. So, guys, listen, I was not messing around. The UFC and USADA, United States Anti-Doping Agency, will be ending their 8-year relationship at the end of 2023. The UFC will now be partnering up with DFSI, which is Drug-Free Sport International, as of January 2024. Though the announcement shook up the MMA world, the UFC has made it clear that they want to continue testing their athletes. They also named their new independent administrator to oversee the new anti-doping program, George Pirro, a former FBI agent. Let's dig in here, fellas. Lots to unpack. Let's hear what your reaction was to the big news, and then we'll circle back as there was an interesting tie-in to this story. We go to Boston. The Boston shot caller is going to lead things off here. What's the first take, Nolan?
It was pretty shocking, a week that saw multiple UFC 294 title fights fall apart, that saw Dylan Dennis box Logan Paul, that saw Pat Miletich come back at 55. I mean, the USADA story was the one that dominated, I think the sphere for us. It was a surprise. I think from the start, getting that, everybody was sitting around. We were bugging USADA for weeks and weeks about, is Conor McGregor back in the pool? Is Conor McGregor back in the pool? And then we get the answer to that question, and it's tied in with a very strongly worded, kind of borderline unprofessional sort of message from USADA, where it seemed like they kind of aired a little bit of grievances against the UFC. Very interesting, right? When we got that message, to see that sort of tone, to see them kind of announce this seemingly a bit rogue, away from any sort of official kind of handshake parting of ways that you would think maybe two businesses would have. That's not what happened. So I think from the start here, it was a bit of a shock. Obviously, we had that kind of period of silence from the UFC, and then we get note that they're going to have that press conference with Jeff Nowitzki and Hunter Campbell. And that was, again, I think a monumental thing in MMA history, in the UFC history. Hunter Campbell's been one of the most influential people in this organization for years now, and we very seldom, that I can think of, have ever had the opportunity to ask him questions, especially in an official UFC capacity like this. So I think it speaks to the seriousness and just the magnitude of this breakup with USADA. And you could tell from the language that they were using, from the body language you can see right there with Jeff Nowitzki, they were pissed. Definitely pretty angry. Again, strongly worded legal letter that they handed out to the media that were in attendance there. So it was a very surprising, I think, just development. It's very monumental for the sport. I'm very interested to see. I know we've heard a lot of the details that they expressed during this. It seems like a lot of them are still going to be worked out in terms of what the drug testing program is going to look like. But it's sparked a lot of, I think, healthy conversations, which we're going to have right here too, is what is the legacy of USADA? What is, how do we kind of view that period of time? How are things going to be different going forward? And for me, I mean, I reflect on that USADA era kind of as it was a bit of a game changer, right? Integrating drug testing into the UFC. But at the same time, I think it proved how there's really no perfect way to go about drug testing. There were some real messy, confusing issues that occurred, especially when USADA first started up with all sorts of fighters and different substances that I think proved that drug testing is not necessarily a black and white thing. I think if you have no drug testing, it's not a good thing. If you have too much drug testing, it's not a good thing. And it's really started to kind of prove that it's not necessary. There isn't a perfect black and white way to do this. So we'll see what happens with these changes that were expressed by Nowitzki and Hunter Campbell. We'll see how much is actually going to change. I'm happy to hear, and I'm glad we have Cub on today because I think he can kind of provide some unique insight into all of this. Is like, what do the fighters want? Do they have a say? Other sports, when they have collective bargaining, part of the drug testing. The drug testing is part of kind of what's negotiated. So we don't really have that, obviously, in MMA. We don't have that. So it would be interesting to hear. I hope that the UFC takes into account what the athletes have to say too, because I think that's going to be a key factor in making this a successful thing for people going forward.
Good stuff, Nolan. All right, Goes. How about you, man? Your reaction? You saw those tweets. People were like, okay, the fights are going to get interesting now. Let's all start juicing. Of course, a lot of sarcasm, but there was some uncertainty. Then, of course, the UFC started clarifying things. But still, initially, what was going through your head?
I think it was a very unfortunate situation because of how the news broke. Because of the way it broke, it created this mass confusion, amongst the media, amongst fans, even amongst the fighters. Like they didn't really know what was going on. That's the part that sucked the most, right? The biggest fear for everyone is that if a drug testing program went completely away, what's going to happen now? What are fighters going to do? Because it's a scary thing, right? If you're an athlete and somebody on the other side of you is cheating, this is damage that they could cause that you don't get back, right? A slap on the wrist doesn't really matter to you at that point. The damage has been done. So that's not what's happening here. The UFC scrambled, they put something together and they kind of clarified, all right, drug-free sport, this is where they're going. And then they had that press conference. And the press conference, you got to give them props because that did clear up a lot of things. Now, granted, we have to take everything from their side. And it actually did kind of crack me up because you don't really see Hunter Campbell too much. You see Jeff Nowitzki a little bit more, but even then, you don't see him that much. But when they were there, it almost reminded me of like when a husband goes out and buys an expensive car. The first thing they do when they come is they tell you but honey, the bells and whistles. Now you can listen to your favorite show. Now you got this. Now, like they kind of hit you with a lot of that type of stuff, right? So if you're a fighter, I think that's a lot of stuff that's going to make you happy. The app that was such a big problem for everybody, right? The getting woken up in the middle of the night, getting bothered while you're weight cutting. I think they hit you with a lot of that type of news to kind of soften that blow a little bit. But really, what it came down to was it was ugly, from the USADA side, and you see that the things that they were saying, you kind of understand what Hunter Campbell was saying as far as there being like a little bit of malice, right? That part I do get, and I did feel that. On the UFC side, like there are probably things that they could have done too to help this relationship be a little better. But I'm glad that we're going in a good direction because at the end of the day, USADA was a good thing. Remember when they first came around, heads were rolling, right? Like there were a lot of people getting caught. I think just the announcement of USADA when it first came out probably curved a lot of people where they said, well, this game's over, right? I can't do this. And then there were probably some people that were like, well, I'm going to test this and see how far I can go. It definitely made a big difference in our sport. It was a very important thing to bring on USADA. And now that they're going in another direction, and we know that drug testing will still be around, we just got to hope that all these promises that were made will stand. Because if they don't, people are going to look back at the situation and go, hey, you shouldn't have let go of one of the major players in the sport.
Yeah, they called it the gold standard of testing, and a lot of us did feel pretty good about that, knowing that maybe main events wouldn't fall through because of that, or results that had taken place wouldn't have to be overturned. That kind of gave us comfort, I guess, as media and fans. Killer Cub, I know you got two perspectives here. You've been in that octagon, the blood, sweat, and tears. Over a lot of years, but especially this 8-year run. And you're also a manager, so I'm sure you might have been fielding calls from some of the guys that you help, and then I'm sure you had questions too. But what was that initial reaction?
Well, my initial reaction was I was pissed. I was like, "Are you serious?" And really, like Go said, it's the way it came out. There was no answers right away, so you get this news, and then obviously Twitter blows up, and people are making jokes, and so yeah, my initial reaction was I was pissed because, USADA came in, they set the standard. You know, us as a fight organization has always been fighting because I come from way back, so we've always tried to be fighting for our respect as well as a legitimate sport, and I feel like we've done all the right things, and then just I'd say with the announcement of the UFC merging with WWE to become TKO, and then kicking out USADA like back to back, I feel like just the perception of that wasn't great. And so, yeah, it wasn't great timing. It wasn't great the way it came out. we've since learned some things that there's been some issues. So now I'm optimistic. I'm being really optimistic because although USADA did an amazing job, there were some things that I definitely disagreed with, and I think the UFC disagreed with. You know, they banned a couple things that were healing agents, a couple peptides that they're finding are helping fighters recover better. And let's say your favorite fighter has an injury that's nagging, and there's something out there that he could take to help him recover to be able to get back in there. That's not performance enhancing, but just a healing agent. I think that, you know, we should think twice about letting stuff like that, you know, be legal for us to take. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that could have done better. So I'm being optimistic about what this new relationship is going to bring for the fighters.
Good stuff, Cub. Take it down a couple notches, man. You're scaring us here on the panel. You might become a permanent fixture. So, no, we appreciate that. So, like Nolan teased, you know, there was some big news that paralleled the big news, right? The official acknowledgement from USADA that Conor McGregor was back in the USADA testing pool. And so we were left wondering how this might affect, you know, everything going forward, the big fight, I guess, against Chandler and all. But Travis Tigert, the CEO of USADA, had this to say. Here's a quote from him that accompanied that press release, or was in the press release, I should say. The relationship between USADA and the UFC became untenable, given the statements made by UFC leaders and others questioning USADA's principal stance that McGregor not be allowed to fight without being in the testing pool for at least 6 months. He continues, unfortunately, we do not currently know whether the UFC will ultimately honor the 6-month or longer requirement, because as of January 1st, USADA will no longer be involved in the UFC anti-doping program. Despite a positive and productive meeting about a contract renewal in May of 2023, the UFC did an about-face and informed USADA on Monday, October 9th, that this was going in a different direction. More active to tell their side of the story, especially regarding McGregor's long-awaited return to testing and its details. From the UFC side, they're disgusted by USADA's claim that the McGregor situation was a relationship, and they even demanded an apology. Here's what Hunter Campbell had to say, a couple quotes from him. Disappointingly, they used Conor McGregor as a vehicle to sort of articulate and reframe a complete misrepresentation of what occurred over the last several months. At no point in time did Jeff Nowitzki, myself, or any other representative, Dana, not a single person ever went to USADA and told them anything other than Conor McGregor would re-enter the program when he was healthy. In doing so, we would require him to do the program for 6 months. There would be no exception to the rule. All right, guys. So 2 sides to a story, yada, yada. But I want to know, what concerned you the most when it came to McGregor's path back to competition in terms of PD testing? And now that you've heard both sides, how do you piece all that together? Your reaction to that, Nolan?
Yeah, I mean, it's a he said, she said sort of scenario here, right? The statement that USADA put out initially, certainly, I don't know if it explicitly said it, but it certainly heavily implied that, you know, that the UFC had asked for Conor to kind of be an exception to the rule or an exemption. I know Hunter Campbell very, very explicitly said afterwards in that press conference that was not the case, that they had not once asked that, and that they had actually said the contrary. That was what a lot of that legal letter demanding an apology, which they did not receive from USADA, that's what that whole thing based around. So I guess it was reassuring to hear that the UFC at that press conference was saying that they were never going to ask for an exception for him. I will say, again, when you have this kind of he said, she said sort of scenario, it's hard to figure out who is telling the truth, or if they're both kind of right. But for me, I do think that Dana White was asked about this every week, essentially, on Contender Series, about Conor and about USADA and about whatever. And it seemed like, I know his answer was kind of like, oh, I don't really have anything to do with that drug testing. I think that they could have avoided this problem, this question of whether or not the UFC was trying to get an exception, if he had just said, no, we're not going to allow him to do that. You know, he's going to have to wait the 6 months like everybody else. Where I feel like towards the end, especially the last few weeks that he was asked this question, he didn't necessarily deny that would happen. He was just saying, we're figuring it out, you know. So I guess for me, I'm hoping with how strongly Hunter and Jeff Nowitzki's message that wasn't the case at that press conference. How strong that was, I'm hoping is an indicator that they will make him do 6 months of testing. I mean, again, who knows kind of what the rules will be with this new program. I know we have a few months left of the USADA testing. It'll be interesting to see how much they test him before January 1st rolls around. But I think that rule's fair. Fair. It helps people not necessarily dodge around the drug testing. Granted, he's coming back from. Got to remember, he's coming back from a pretty brutal injury where maybe some of those things that USADA would not permit him to take out of competition were things that he should have been allowed to take. So another aspect of this program that Jeff and Hunter kind of were talking about potentially allowing going forward is fighters that have catastrophic injuries, allowing them to take medications that would allow them to recover better. So it'll be interesting. I hope they make him still take that 6 months off, which I think would put him around April, which would be kind of just in time for UFC 300, which I'm sure he's looking to get on if he is serious about competing. But definitely, again, very messy situation. It'll be interesting to see if they do file some sort of lawsuit. I'm assuming they will. And I guess we'll maybe some discoveries will come to light out of that.
Good stuff. All right, goes the whole thing with McGregor, the tie-in, man. You heard both sides. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say two things, right? One, USADA didn't handle this in the most professional way, right? The response was scathing, and that it kind of does go hand in hand with what Hunter Campbell was saying. If you just read what they said, I can see that point of view. But on the other side, number two is, Conor McGregor may not have been the reason for this. It seems like this was a move that was going to already happen. We have to take their word for it at that. But he definitely didn't help the situation, right? And the UFC didn't really help themselves by letting him kind of run amok on social media. Like he says what he wants and sometimes is able to do what he wants, right? We're not privy to these conversations that they have behind closed doors. We're not there when Hunter Campbell's assuring that he is going to take this time off to USADA. We don't get to hear that as fans, as media, as other fighters on the roster. So when Conor says, I'm fighting in December, and the UFC doesn't raise their hand and say, no, he's not, that's not happening. We've seen Conor just kind of get away with things that other fighters don't get away with. So that's why I think people jump on him as soon as his name is ever thrown out there like that, right? And I don't think the UFC can really blame people because I feel like they do kind of have a little bit of responsibility because they could have made the relationship a little better. If they would have put up their hand and said, hey, no, that's not going to go down, this is not what's happening, then there's probably not that type of confusion, right? The relationship ended up pretty bad, but remember, this has to last until the end of the year. So this is still going to keep going on. Like Nolan said, hopefully Conor does have to take that time, and it's looking like it probably will be that thing. I mean, this kind of all spells out UFC 300, but I feel like both sides had a little bit of blame on both sides.
All right, and Cub, finally, from you, same thing. The McGregor effect, we'll call it. I'm sure that maybe along the way there's been some positive stuff that has trickled down to other fighters, and maybe there's been some stuff where you just watch and say, "Wow, I can't do that."
Yeah, well, it's a unique situation. I got to give the UFC credit for always backing us up when we've complained about USADA. There's guys that have complained a lot more. Obviously, I think a lot of fighters don't want to do it, so they already are going into it with a negative attitude when people show up to test them. I always kept a good relationship with the people that tested me because I know they don't want to wake me up. I don't want to get up, but it has to be done. So I just made the best of it. So I think that some fighters were shooting themselves in the foot and getting off on the wrong foot with some of these people coming to test them. I think the problem is that this whole thing happened with Conor. He had that injury. It looked like he took himself out of the testing pool so he could take something that he wasn't allowed to take to help speed up the process of his healing to make sure he healed right. And then he gained a lot of size and was, bragging about it, how big he was. So I think USADA took that as kind of like this guy is cheating the system because most fighters aren't able to just drop out of the testing pool and jump back in because I'd say 99% of the fighters on the roster if they took themselves out of the testing pool, they'd be no longer with the company. So there's not a lot of people that could do that, be in that position to take themselves out, get healthy, and come back in. And I think USADA saw that as, I think this guy's trying to cheat the system, and we're going to lose some of our power if we allow this to happen. So they wanted to kind of, make him an example of you can't cheat the system. And I think that's why they kind of came at him so hard. And I don't blame them for that. And so I can see why both sides are upset. But it definitely, it definitely is crashing right now. I don't think that they can, make this any better than the relationship any better anymore.
Yeah. Well, it ends here in about 45 days or so. It ends in 2023, and seamlessly, apparently, it'll start in January 24 with DFSI. So that's definitely a good thing, Cub. I imagine I'll go back to you from a peace of mind. I know you don't have 20 fights left. I don't know how many fights left you have, but can you talk about that? Was there a peace of mind just knowing that, hey, it's going to be as clean of a fight as possible? May the best man win.
Yeah, because for me, I've always wanted to compete clean because it's the long-term effects. I think some of the stuff we're seeing in these older fighters, the issues they're having, it's a lot of not the health problems they're having are from them coming down off of using some steroids for years. They're having problems with their weight. They're having problems with emotionally. I think I've always thought that head trauma and steroids together was a bad mix, and so that's why I've always tried to stay away from that stuff. And now that we've had drug testing for so long, I've been very proud of the sport and seen what we're doing. And so, yeah, I'm just hoping this new company can continue on and do an even better job.
Hey, Cub, if you don't mind me asking, like, what are things that you want to see out of this new company? That fighters we've heard often say, look, I shouldn't be getting woken up at 5 a.m. I shouldn't be tested while I'm trying to cut weight. What are like the little things that you would tweak in that system?
Man, it's tough to say because personally, I don't mind getting woken up because it's usually around the time I was going to get up. It's not the greatest scenario, but I don't have to worry about them showing up at the gym when I decided to go to a different gym that day. It's like the little things. So, like I said, a lot of fighters are going to make it way worse than it is. It's not great. But the thing is when all the fighters are on the same page and we're all doing it the same way, you can't complain because you can't say somebody's getting it worse than others. But unfortunately, some people are getting it worse than others. So I would say that's the issue, is they need to make it all the same for everybody, which is why the Conor situation is even in this, conversation, is because the testing needs to be the same for everybody. It needs to be fair. And I think that's probably where they lost the control right there.
And so, Cub, look, maybe we'll abandon the format here for just a second because this is very fascinating getting your introspective. Okay, so the 5 a.m. calls didn't bother you or whatever, but, were there any other things that I guess did possibly bother you that if someone came to you for feedback, you would give to them? And now, not just for yourself, but as again, when you're a manager, and I know you, Cub, you're probably holding mitts, you're probably on the sauna, you're a teammate, you know what I mean? So I'm sure this is something that you'll be a part of for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the toughest thing was like doing the whereabouts like every quarter. And so they used to do it like 15 days before was the deadline for whatever quarter you were in. And so I had to tell them where I was going to be at every day for the next 3 months, which is mentally exhausting for me because I kind of take it 1 week at a time because I'm so busy. And so it'd be a little stressful. And then they moved it back to 15 days before that. So a month out, you're supposed to be telling USADA where you're going to be at for the next 3 months. And, as a manager as well, I started having to get all my guys in check my fighters, and then they'd contact me and say, hey, this fighter and this fighter haven't done their whereabouts. So I'd call them and, hey guys, you got to do it. So I mean, those are the things I complain about, but I don't even think they're that bad. So I really didn't have any really bad experiences with USADA. They're just inconvenient sometimes, but that was a price I was willing to pay for a clean sport.
Do you ever feel like you were, I think I know the answer, but do you ever think you might have been cheated out of a win or a better performance by someone, that was possibly enhanced? Thereby, when 2015 came around, a huge relief, maybe. I don't know.
100% I do. I felt like at one point I was one of the only people ranked in my division that I felt like was clean. But that's just my personal opinion, and I feel like the sport, like I said, has come a long way, and I don't want to see it go backwards. That's why I was initially upset. But like I said, I'm optimistic about this new company, and we're still a growing company, so I'd like to see improvements, and so I'm optimistic.
All right. Well, folks, I'm, by the way, in southern Peru, so I apologize if I've been buffering in and out. I had a great connection this past week and felt good about hosting Spinning Back Clique, but I think I may have gone in and out a few times, so apologies on my behalf and on behalf of MMA Junkie. But we're going to keep trucking through. I'm also looking at the comments, and there's a lot of stuff that I might circle back to because you guys have really come strong with the comments and the questions, and this is a very important topic. Now, if I may ask one thing from you guys, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button. This channel pops, and all that also triggers an algorithm that kind of gets us more in the eyes of other hardcore MMA fans like yourself. Just takes a second, hit that like, subscribe. By the way, that little bell, that'll tell you when we're on live. And imagine missing out an opportunity to hear from Killer Cub after such a crazy week in the sport of mixed martial arts. All right, so listen, guys, let's move on here. And again, I'll see if we have time to circle back. Important topic. You guys did outstanding. So listen, Chucky Olives is out of UFC 294. Alexander the Great is in. I've wanted to see both fights run back, make no mistake, but I have to be honest. Less than 2 weeks, quite a bit of travel involved, a last-second weight cut. I doubt we're getting the best Volk. Also, Mateus Gamrot was the backup fighter for the main event. He's a proper 55er with a decorated resume. The UFC, chose him, and they went with Volk. All right. So, guys, are you more pleased with the new main event? Yay or nay? And then expand. Go, start off.
Man, so yeah, this kind of got lost in the shuffle with everything that was going on. It was an absolute insane week, but I want to tackle this from different angles, right? Because there's different ways of looking at this. As a fan, let's say as a family man, I got Thursday night football. I have Major League Baseball playoffs. I have college football on Saturday. I have the NFL on Sunday. Something's got to go. I'm not married to my TV, right? So I'll say this. The way the card is placed now, I would probably be more likely to order that pay-per-view. I think that's a win for a fan. If I'm the UFC, I just delivered arguably a better card to the fans. Viewers are going to be more into it. Live attendees who aren't paying for the exact same card they paid for last time they were out there with Oliveira and Makhachev, they got to be happy. My partners probably have to be happy in all this, right? So if you're the UFC, I think that's a win as well. As a hardcore fan, I'm a little upset, and I'm going to tell you why. I was one of the first ones to kind of shit on this card or this fight the first time around. I just felt like you have to clean out divisions before you can have fighters face each other off like that, because it puts too many people in a waiting pattern. You never know what's going to happen with injuries. It's just a lot of confusion, and I didn't think it needed to happen. Once the fight actually happened, it was a great fight, and I was open to seeing it again. Just it has to be under the right circumstances, okay? You see everything that they said after the first fight, how close that first fight was. I'm down. It just didn't have to happen right now. And the problem that I'm having with this is you look at how close that fight was, and that's Alexander Volkanovski going up a weight class and challenging not just any lightweight, the guy at the top, right? If we were all in high school and a junior challenged the senior to the fight at lunch, that senior better mop the floor with the junior, right? And that didn't really happen. It was a very, very close fight. So my issue now is a close fight like that. I want to know that we have the best representation of both fighters involved in this matchup, because look, it's short notice. I know Alexander Volkanovski is a great fighter, and I don't doubt that he could give a good performance in this fight. Like, he might go out there and win. That can very well happen. But I don't want to be left with that feeling. If Alexander Volkanovski goes out and wins rounds 1 and 2 and then starts to fade and loses the fight because of that, that's not a feeling that I want to have. And I feel like we could have gotten this fight later on. I feel like we were just kind of trying to solve a problem right now, make everybody happy right now, but we didn't really look into the future of what could have been an even bigger card, an even bigger fight. Especially if those guys keep going in the mode that they're going, they're winning fights. So I think we were a little cheated there. I'm going to give you an example. When Chad Mendes fought Conor McGregor, didn't we all kind of look at each other and go, man, I feel like a full camp of a Chad Mendes probably takes this fight. And imagine the trajectory of Conor McGregor's career, how that would have changed things. I'm just going to be really bummed out if we don't feel like we get a true representation of Alexander Volkanovski. That I feel like we're missing out because we're trying to make everybody happy now. I think Gamrot would have been a decent replacement. It would have been a different fight. It probably would have been sufficient. And then with the co-main shakeup there, I think everybody would have been okay. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to have goosebumps the night of. I'm going to be cheering that fight on. But I'm just worried about certain things that could happen that maybe takes away from what a hardcore MMA junkie fan wants.
For sure, goes. Chad Mendes, great example. All right, Cub, you've been in that situation, right up with, title contender, the possible title challenger. I don't know. Did any of this bring back good memories, bad memories? What are your thoughts when you kind of see these types of shakeups?
Well, it's unfortunate for certain people, because Gamrot, this was his chance to get a title fight, and I'm sure he was prepping, hoping the opportunity would happen, and then opportunity comes, and they were like, "Oh, not today. We're going to give it to somebody else." So, as far as going from Oliveira to Volkanovski, I think it's kind of a lateral move because it's somebody that it's both fighters that we wanted to see the rematch, but I think looking long term, it doesn't make as much sense. I think if Volkanovski can do this amazing win, it's way better for everybody because Volkanovski is a star, and maybe he does move up and stay there. But if he loses, then he goes back to 45, and then is he gonna go against Topuria? That was a fight I think a lot of people in the 45-pound division were excited about. And so does that lose some of its shine? So, yeah, I wish they would have just given the fight to Gamrot and kept Topuria and Volkanovski, ready to fight. But, the UFC wants to, book the biggest fights, and I can see this one being the next biggest one. So I'm on the fence about it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Nolan King, man, how about you? You happy with this? Yay or nay?
It's hard for me to complain just because I keep bringing myself back to after we saw them fight the first time. And just walking away from that fight, I just remember thinking that might have been the most perfect fight that I've ever watched. Like, it was so competitive. The skill level was something that we hadn't really, I don't think, ever seen in MMA before. It just felt like kind of a next level sort of fight. The arena was great. So it's really hard for me to say anything negative, but at the same time, Goza's point about the full camp thing, will we be thinking afterwards, we wasted the big fight now. Like, it would have been great to see these guys on full camps, try to do it again. It kind of gives me the vibe of when Jorge Masvidal stepped up on short notice to fight Usman the first time, where we were like hankering for that fight. And then we got it on like a week's notice, and then he looked tired in the fight. And granted, I think maybe the fight would have played out like that anyway in retrospect, but it does kind of make you wonder, how much the short notice nature of this fight, how much that will impact Volkanovski in this fight. So I can't complain. Honestly, I think it's one of my favorite fights that I've ever seen. So right up there with Cub Swanson versus Doo Ho Choi. So I'm excited to see it again, but we'll revisit in a week to see if there's anything that I, in hindsight, will wish happened instead.
Good stuff. Yeah, that Swanson Choi fight definitely was pretty good. Maybe one day
It
it'll
was
be in the
all
Hall of
right.
Fame. Who knows? All right, so Cub, back to you. I'm coming to you with a question from the chat. Sorry, chat, I'm slow in bringing these in. You guys have been overwhelming me, and of course, like I said, that connection tripped me up for a second. This comes from Pro Fights Info. Question for Cub: what is a moment from your career that stands out as a huge risk that you took on short notice or at a different weight, but it paid off with the win? And what were the emotions throughout?
Oh man, I don't think I had any short notice fights that went my way. I really didn't take short notice fights my whole career. I tried to on a couple title fights. They didn't choose me, and the only short notice fight I really took was against Frankie, the second fight. Well, actually, the first fight. They kept giving me Frankie on short notice, which is not fun to prepare for on short notice. But yeah, so they didn't work out great for me, and yeah, I try not to get any of my guys to do short notice fights because you just, it's so hard to be prepared. It's so hard to have your timing down, to feel like you're peaking, to do all these things. So, when the opportunity's there, you got to take it. But if you don't have to, I definitely wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Does it pretty much kind of is it tough to turn down though? Because usually they dangle some money, right? And then usually it's
Yeah,
kind of
well,
like, hey pal, we're gonna remember this. And do you feel like that?
yeah. Sometimes they offer money, and sometimes they don't. It just depends on the situation. So the last time I was asked to take a short notice fight, I said that if they paid me more money, and they said, well, we're paying you a lot already, and I was like, well, I have a fight already scheduled, and yeah, then that I ended up not getting either fight. So that my opponent ended up taking the fight, so that kind of backfired in my face. But yeah, that it can happen. Like I said, you got to look at the risk versus reward, and sometimes the reward is enough to give it a shot. Obviously, for Volkanovski in this sense, it's a title fight, so and a bigger one than you already have. So yeah, it's always depends on the situation, and you gotta live with whatever decision you make.
Wow, that one had to have stung. The opponent got it. You said,
Yeah, yeah.
"Jeez,
Yeah,
whew,
that one was tough because
brutal."
I literally was lifting weights and training, and they're like, "Cub, we got a short notice fight. Will you take it?" And I was like, I'm down to do it, but you gotta pay me more because this is gonna hurt, to really crunch in this short time frame." And then yeah, they ended up giving it to the opponent that I was preparing for, and then didn't have a fight, and then I was just like, "Oh man, that sucks."
Mm,
Man, you know what? Like that's interesting, Cub, because I didn't think about this. We kind of looked at this from the UFC's perspective, from the fans' perspective, but I never once thought about looking at it from Alexander's perspective. And in his case, he's probably thinking big paycheck, a guy I've already fought, I'm familiar with. And
Hmm.
even if I lose, I'm still the champ over here. I'm still the baddest guy over here. And really, I mean, I'm testing myself by going up. Like he's really in a situation where maybe he doesn't lose out as much. Now we talk about this fight down the road could have been pretty big, but I imagine whatever they gave him to do this on short notice, traveling that far probably was beneficial financial. But I never really thought to think about what it was like from his perspective.
Yeah, I mean, unless he goes out there and just flops, which we don't expect from him, as long as he makes it competitive, he's only going to gain from the situation because he's testing himself. That's why when we talk about like best of the best, I can't really put Khabib up there because his resume isn't that amazing. His last 5 fights were incredible, but before that, his resume is not really as good as like the John Joneses and the Anderson Silvas, right? And then he didn't test himself. Volkanovski, that guy's been testing himself as much as possible. So you can't question his resume. And like I said, it was just high reward. So why not do it?
I'm curious, guys, on the same topic. Like, all right, if we look at this from Ilya Tapura's standpoint, would you be almost a little bit thankful that now this guy that just seems unbeatable, he's going to have more mileage on him before he gets to you? Another camp, another fight. Could it be beneficial for him, or do you think he's sitting there going, I'm missing out on my spot? Because I feel like it's his spot no matter what. He just got to wait a little bit more.
I'll go to Cub. I mean, I didn't get in the
Yeah.
damn
So,
up.
I mean, in my experience, I think that Tapura, it's better for him if Volkanovski loses, because and Volkanovski might be an anomaly here, but usually this fight game, you got to have momentum, right? You got to have momentum. So him coming off of a win or coming off of a loss is completely different mentally for that fighter going into the fight. So I would imagine if Volkanovski loses and he's like, oh, well, I'm going to fight Tapura. Tapura might be feeling like, okay, he's coming off of a loss. He's questioning his abilities a little bit versus somebody that's been just steamrolling people and making it look easy. So, personally, that's the way I would be thinking about it is if he loses, is he going to be questioning himself just a little bit for me to get right in his face right away? Or, I mean, if he wins, does he move up now? And now he's not going to come back to 45. So, he's got to be asking himself a lot of questions.
Good stuff, guys. All right. Well, look, there's another fight to discuss on UFC 294. Khamzat Chimaev also has a new opponent. Paulo Costa is out. They deemed him medically unfit to compete. Former UFC welterweight champion Kamaru Usman, he's in. Just days after confirming that the switch at the top of the bill with Islam, the UFC also comes up with a new matchup in the co-main event. They also sweeten the pot, I guess, a little bit. UFC president Dana White said that this is a title eliminator, guys. He told that on the Pat McAfee show. Quote, this is an absolute fact. The fact that these guys are taking this fight on short notice, the winner will get the next shot at the title, barring injuries and other things that can possibly happen. He also had one other quote that I found as we were prepping for this topic. That's what makes fighting so fun. They're all taking these fights just over a week out, and they're all accepting risks. They believe in themselves. And to my way of thinking, this is what makes the sport so great when you have world champions or guys who are in the top 5 of the world, and that's their mindset. All right, we're going to go to Cub first. Guys, this is what I want to know. Are you giving these guys, the UFC, a fist bump or a thumbs down to all this? Remember, the matchup's pretty dope, but the whole title eliminator thing, I don't know. Cub, your thoughts?
I'm definitely giving a fist bump because, if you guys have ever been around a matchmaker, they just look stressed out all the time. I wouldn't want their job, and to make a great card and to have it kind of fall apart and then having to do better than what you already did or try to make it as good. It's just got to be crazy. And my hat's off to them for continually putting out great fights and getting fighters to step up. So yeah, I'll definitely give them, props to them. As far as it being a better fight, I kind of feel like it is. I don't know. Paulo Costa trips me out. He just seems like I don't know, like he wants to be famous. It's like, I'm not sure if he's more worried about the perception of him or his fighting ability, but I feel like anybody who puts their injuries online before a fight is almost looking for a way out. Like he was already accepting that he wasn't going to fight. That just seems strange to me, that behavior, because any fighter that has an injury is going to keep it under wraps and try to, make it to the fight and not show any weaknesses. And so for him to put that, pictures and stuff out of his elbow, it almost was like, hey, if I lose, this is the reason. And usually people post that kind of stuff after fights. But as far as the new matchup, I love it. I wish Usman would have had a full training camp because I am a big fan of his. I like his skills. I wanted to see what he do at 185. So I'm curious to see how they match up. And they both have really good wrestling and powerful strikers. So I love the matchup. I just wish Usman would have had a little bit more time and also not coming off back-to-back losses.
Cub, that's an interesting take that you said about the matchmaker. Yes, them coming to the rescue and all that. But what about Adrikas Duplessis, who is, I think, 4-0, 5-0 in the UFC, kind of has vaulted himself towards the top. What about a Jared Cannonier who also has been near the top and even did the alternate spot for the last fight that we had with Strickland versus Adesanya? They didn't use him. And I know he's got a fight book, but what about those guys at the top? It seems a little unfair to me, a guy that's moving up to welterweight, just because he kind of did a favor, scratch someone's back, he might get a title shot.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what happens in this game is the guys that step up, if they have a great performance, they can just step in and be that guy. Yeah, who knows if those other guys were offered, title fights. Do we know? Do you guys know if anybody else was offered the fight?
I don't know. Do you guys know? No, I don't think
Nope.
so. But Vittori, I might have heard the Vittori name and he declined maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, because usually what they do is they go around and they ask, more than one person and they say, we'll get back to you. And they see what they have and they try to make the best fight. So, I don't know why they chose this one, but I mean, I still like the fight.
Okay. How about you, Nolan? Your thoughts on the way this one panned out, this co-main event?
Yeah, I love it. It's weird. The UFC right now seemingly can't miss, right? Like even when things go wrong, they go right. We ended up with 2 upgrades, it seems like, in terms of the matchups themselves. I know we've talked at length about the short notice nature of each, but I'm excited for this one. I think it's the toughest test that Khamzat's faced for sure. And I think Usman, it's the perfect fight to kind of get people back on his bandwagon. A fresh start at middleweight, going in there, taking out the guy that is the guy to beat in this division, or either division, really. I mean, Khamzat Chimaev's just surging. He's got the full promotion power behind him, and Usman can come in and kind of steal some of that thunder. Not necessarily that he needs it, but he can remind people that, he was one of the all-time, if not the greatest welterweight ever, and now he's going to do his thing at middleweight and see if that makes a difference. So I love this fight. I love both these fights. I think the UFC did an excellent job at finding replacements. I mean, let's face it, like there's a lot of other fights that we could have been looking at for next week that still would have been good, but they might have been downgrades. And instead we have 2 fights that I think people are really buzzing about. I think that the chaos of this week probably added even a whole nother level, reminded people this event's right around the corner, got people talking about it. Everybody knows who's fighting. So I'm excited, man. UFC 294 is going to be a good one. And that 1-2 punch at the top, man, it's just, they knocked it out of the park, I think.
All right. Stinger Jack in the chat room says it's actually a path for Chimaev to be champ. So maybe the UFC is kind of looking at it from that point of view. Joseph Boza checking my ass. He says DDP is actually 6-0 in the UFC. Jared has won 4 of his last fights. Those 2 had a claim to a shot with Sean as champion. All right, Goes. How about you, man? What are your thoughts here?
I give a fist bump, but I probably don't come in for a bro hug just because I don't think they needed to throw out the whoever wins this gets a shot at the title, because there are guys like Cannonier, there are guys like Drikas that I think probably deserve that a little bit more. I think just the compensation on the money side would have been enough. But we don't really know behind closed doors how many people passed on this fight. And I really don't blame them. This is a really, really rough situation. It's funny because Sean Strickland's usually the guy that comes in and bails us out of these situations, right? But now he's the guy up on top. So Kamaru Usman, his name still carries weight. He's a great fighter. It's a decent fight. I think the idea of moving up a weight class and facing a guy who's not really made a career for himself at middleweight benefits Kamaru Usman. And on the flip side, if you're Khamzat Chimaev in the middleweight division, you're getting a guy that you used to share a division with at 170. So you get to make a splash at 185 against a guy who's not really a middleweight. That's like a win-win for both guys. And on top of that, they have the opportunity to make money and possibly fight for a belt. I think this is a great deal all the way around for both guys. And, for Khamzat Chimaev, if he wins this fight, like, I don't think people will really remember the circumstances behind it. I think you just look at the skin on your wall and you see Kamaru Usman, a former champion. That's just a solid name, man. I think it was a win-win for both guys.
All right. I think you guys might have convinced me. I was more of a sourpuss when the show started, but I guess I am pumped up about it. At least he lets himself be out. Dana did say other things may happen. That usually means that contract stuff, who's being a hardhead, who's difficult to deal with. But he kind of covered his ass here. All right, guys, let's have a little bit of fun, and then I'm going to start scanning the chats. I saw some good questions for Cub. We might as well maximize the time that we have with him here. But we got to get this one out because it was blowing up on Twitter. Worlds collided with Dylan Dennis and Logan Paul boxing this Saturday. Paul won the fight via disqualification in the last round, I should say, of the 6. Is this the end of Dylan Dennis, or do you think he'll find a way to resurface? We're back to Nolan leading things off here, man. What do you think?
Yeah, it shows you that I don't even know what to think, man, about Dylan Dennis. I was kind of sick of hearing about him. I figured that would be the case with most of the masses as well. But I think by our numbers, by the numbers on social media that anybody can look at, he's got generated interest, whether it's, kind of hate clicks or whatever you want to call it. I mean, he's on Piers Morgan tonight. So from doing nothing, from not fighting, I don't think there's been anybody that's ever garnered more attention as a fighter from doing absolutely nothing. But the fact that he has appeared has had kind of this weird opposites thing where the guy that never fights is fighting. Now everybody let's see what he has, and then he goes out there and puts on an awful fight, and now people are seemingly even more interested. So I really don't know. I've never had a good gauge or compass when it comes to Dylan Dennis and the interest. I don't necessarily understand it. It's unfortunate because actually initially I was very on board with him. I mean, it was such an interesting signing by Bellator. He was kind of taking it slow. It was when McGregor was peaking. I thought this trajectory was going to be great. And then we've just kind of veered off. And granted, he's had brutal knee surgeries and stuff, so it's not totally his fault. But he certainly leaned into the trolling, so to speak. It was just, I guess, surprising enough for people to see him on a fight surface on Saturday to generate that sort of interest. But we'll see. I mean, will people be buying his next fight, whether it's boxing or MMA? I don't necessarily think so. I think just in terms of the lack of entertainment value, maybe things have finally caught up to him. But in terms of interviews, in terms of people, kind of feeding into his trolling, I think that's pretty clear that that's going to continue.
All right, Goes. What did you think of that madness on Saturday?
Look, I don't think Dylan Dennis is going away anytime soon. I feel like Logan Paul, in a sense, kind of failed here, even though he was awarded the victory. For me, the only outcome in this situation was Dylan Dennis needed to be scraped off of that mat at the end of the fight. He needed to KO him to win. The fact that that didn't happen kind of gives Dylan Dennis a little bit more life to go out there and do all these things. I wasn't really interested in the fight at all until the microphone came across and hit Paul in the head. That at least put me in a situation where I was like, well, now I at least need to know the result. I'm probably not going to order it, but it did make me a little bit more interested in it. But I don't think Dylan Dennis is going away anytime soon, guys.
All right. Anxious to hear what Cub thinks. Is this guy a fighter in your book? He's had just a couple fights in MMA. He's an outstanding grappler. This boxing thing, but man, the guy went home with a bag.
Yeah, I mean, he's not my type of fighter, that's for sure. But yeah, he's made the walk, so we gotta give him credit as a fighter. I wasn't really into this fight. I knew that it wasn't going to be great because I know Dylan Dennis doesn't have any striking, so I wasn't. The only reason I even watched the highlights last night is because I knew we were going to be talking about it, so I had to. But yeah, Dylan Dennis is a troll. He's going to always be popular because, people just seem to gravitate towards that kind of stuff these days. It's, in my opinion, it's what I, don't like about the sport is that we sometimes give people like him too much of a platform, and I dislike it. But what I do like about these, kind of celebrity boxing matches and these kind of gimmicky fights is that you guys get excited about it. The fans, you get excited about it. You talk about it. And then when you see the product is not what you're used to seeing, when you see these great boxing matches and these UFCs almost every weekend, you see what great fighting is. So when you get hyped up on one of these big hype matches, and then you realize that it's crap. I think it just shows the appreciation of what people like myself and all these great fighters in the UFC and boxers do all the time. So, yeah, that's why I'm a fan of watching them. But this one in particular, I wasn't excited about because of Dennis, because I know his skill set wasn't there. He's just a talker. I was really hoping that Mike Perry was going to step in. I would have loved that fight.
Hey, Cub, could you beat both Paul brothers in boxing?
That'd
I know
be
this is size
difficult.
difference, but you've been boxing for a long time with Julio Diaz down in India, I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah.
So you've been
So
around
I
those
mean,
gyms, and
I definitely have more skill than them, that's for sure. But there's no denying the fact that they're pretty big. They got size, so size does matter. I think that I would do better than most of the guys that they fought so far. But it'd be tough because of the size, like I said.
mhm. All right. Here's a question from Cub. We're just going to finish out with this. How does Cub feel about the new gloves? Does he think there's been some improvement with them? And does he notice a difference since using them? And this is right down your wheelhouse. You've had problems with your hands in the past. What are your thoughts on this question from Beavis and Butthead?
So nobody has used the new gloves. We have thought that these new gloves happened, and apparently they didn't. The new, more curved glove, from what I was told, was they had just already been kind of broken in. I actually did see the new gloves on my fighter Danny Silva fought on the Contender Series a couple weeks ago, and they were testing out the actual new gloves that I had never seen before, and they were harder and smaller than the old gloves. So that kind of tripped me out. And they had a very fine kind of texture on the leather that I thought would make people tear a little bit more. So, um, yeah, I feel like I'm one of a handful of people that have seen the actual new gloves. And after Danny Silva had that amazing fight on the Contender Series, I was like, hey, you need to save these gloves because you're going to remember this. And then they came and they took them and they said, hey, we're still studying these. And they took them away. And I was like, oh, man, that sucks. But yeah, so the new gloves, I'm sure they're going to still make some changes. But yeah, I think they're definitely different than the old ones.
And so, are you thinking more from the end of, oh man, I wouldn't want to get hit with one of those, or are you thinking more like, oh, I can't wait to jack someone up with one of those?
Both, because
Okay.
half of you saying, yeah, I can't wait to hit somebody. The other half of you's going, well, wait, I could get hit with these, So yeah, like I said, I don't know what they're going to keep changing on these new gloves, but yeah, I just saw them a couple weeks ago, and I usually wear a size small. I have small hands, but with hand wraps, I can squeeze them to smalls, and they're snug. But on these ones, I grabbed a medium, and without hand wraps, I tried to put them on to just feel them, and I barely could get my hand in. So there's definitely a different sizing for these new gloves.
We got just under a minute, so let me give you one more question that I saw out there. I've seen Cub do some commentating for other organizations, but would he do any of that or on-screen analysis for the UFC after he's finished analyzing? He probably meant fighting.
I've been loving doing LFA. I've only been doing a couple of shows a year, just kind of getting my toes wet. But I had thought about that recently. I would love to do a UFC card just to be at the the in between, the up in the panel with Karen Bryan, or just kind of breaking down fights. But I think I really do enjoy watching these fighters right before they break into that next level. I was able to see Terrence McKinney that we were talking about, and a couple of these other guys. I was able to talk to them right before they made that jump to the next show, and so it's pretty cool being able to do that and being a part of people's journey. So I'm definitely looking forward to doing LFA more.
Nice. All right. Pajman was excited that Cub was in the chat today and part of the panel. And then you also got a shout out from Jay Bird and many others. And Cub, want to thank you for doing this. You did an awesome job. Goes and Nolan as well. And folks, again, you can help us out. We're not asking for much. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, just because we put out so much content pre and post fight, all of the big events that take place in the sport of mixed martial arts, along with a ton of different features like Legend to Legend. Nolan King's done some really good stuff, introspective stuff with fighters. Check out the one with Brendan Ward. That's one that I've gone back and read a few times, and he's up for Journalist of the Year. So Nolan, we got your back. And of course, MMA Junkie's up for Best Media Source. So at World MMA Awards, I heard there might still be some voting. I don't know. I went in there and looked like about a few days ago and looked like we could get in there. So please, that'd be great. And thank you all for joining us here for the last hour. Again, we're back to our normal start time, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, which is where we'll be next week here on Spinning Back Clique. Take care. Go out and be a champion.